they took it to Pavia, Italy. And so if you want to visit, you can. It's a little church. In San Pietro in the Golden Heaven. It's interesting. But so the second major work was the City of God. And remember I mentioned at one point that Gibbon, in his book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, argues that the main reason that the empire fell was because it had become Christian, and therefore because so many people were Christians and were no longer militaristic, that the empire was no longer able to defend itself, and of course hired mercenaries who were Christian, by the way, but the mercenaries were also Germanic or Visigoth or Gothic or whatever. Gothic, they wore black stuff. So no, that's totally different. Goths. However, Augustine argues in this book, The City of God, the City of Man, it's really the City of God and the City of Man, that if the Romans were successful in their empire building days, it was because they were imitating the City of God. But if they started to get corrupt and collapse, that was because they were following the City of Men. So it's not the fault of Christianity that Rome was, at least visibly collapsing around them at the time of Augustine, the late antique period. But instead it was because they were corrupt. Men, so instead of being good Christians, they were being corrupt humans, basically. So that's his defense of Christianity, just in a nutshell, but fascinating book, very important. Lots of interesting information about what was going on, etc. Okay, so too much stuff to talk about just about St. Augustine. I also wanted to talk about Boethius. Well, let's just do Boethius first. So this is not too much after Augustine. Augustine dies in the 400 what? 40? Something like that. But Boethius is thought of as the last Roman, and I don't know why anyone would have actually did that, but that's one of the things people call him. He's a counselor to the emperor, and the emperor was what? Theodosius? Ostrogothic, I guess. Theodoric. So the trouble Boethius had, he was a follower of Athanasius. So that was the Nicene Council's conclusion, that's the orthodox. Orthodox just means the right belief. So basically, if you're a follower of Athanasius, you understand the way that Christianity should actually be understood in light of it being a Platonic universe, as far as they knew. Theodoric, however, was a follower of Arius. And so even though he depended on Boethius for a lot of things, as counseling, financial organization of the empire, and so on, he ended up not trusting Boethius, and he imprisoned him, tortured him, and of course killed him. So Boethius ended up suffering pretty miserably. Yes?
You said Arius or what? That was the Gnostic dude, right?
Arius was the Gnostic.
So Boethius was like playing both sides or something?
I don't think he was trying to play both sides. I'm sure it's complex. Remember Bishop Ambrose at the time of Augustine's conversion was in conflict with an emperor that was a Gnostic as well. So this is a constant tension, I think. Remember, it doesn't go away. We still have this as part of a Christian worldview today. Lots of arguments over how a Christian should be. I mean, just the whole business associated with Charlie Kirk and what's going on today politically is all, of course, relevant in this. But as he was in prison, he used philosophy to console himself, and so you end up with his most famous work is The Consolation of Philosophy. And it's interesting because it does reflect his studies in logic, which was really what I would emphasize as his main influence, his main importance to the Middle Ages, was his translations of Aristotle's logic works. He intended to translate all of Aristotle, but having his life cut short as it was, the only thing he succeeded in doing was translating the logic works. So what we'll see is the monks will end up primarily having logic to play with, and they do a lot with it. It's kind of, they go way the heck past what Aristotle began with and developed logic. Even some argue beyond what we've got today, but some of what the Middle Ages developed, especially Czech monks from what we used to call Czechoslovakia, but Slovakia is a separate country now. They separated after the Soviet collapse. So in any case, so Czechs did some really amazing stuff, and if you go and look up a history of logic, you'll see a lot of that stuff there. So it's not like we forgot it. It's just you don't pay attention to it. It kind of goes away. But so translating Aristotle was his goal, and so just so you're familiar with his name, about all I could do, I suppose. So St. Anselm, what? St. Anselm. St. Anselm of Canterbury, he's not actually from Canterbury. He was sent there. Notice he's from Aosta, which is his birthplace. It's in Italy today. But he spent most of his important time really as the abbot of one of the largest monasteries. Beck was the monastery that he was the head of for a while, and the writings that we're going to look at he wrote while he was there. But the Pope decided he was needed in England, so he sent Anselm to Canterbury to become the Archbishop of Canterbury. And his main job there was to argue with the new Norman kings. I think it was the son of William that he was primarily with. And had constant fights with him because the Pope wanted Christianity to be the religion of all of the people in England, and the Normans just wanted to crush the Saxons. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, basically his job was to keep the king from doing nasty things to the Saxons, which the Norman king wanted to do because he wanted to give all of his Norman knights as much as he could, at the expense of the Saxons. And so his big conflict was, in being an admin type, you know, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, it was a tussle over who was the head of all of the churches. It was all Catholic at the time. But in any case, the king insisted that he go and check with the Pope every time he said no to what he wanted to do. And so Anselm said, sure, because he liked being in the other part of Europe. England's never gotten a wonderful climate review, you know, of you know, anybody. But so he loved going back to Italy to check with the Pope. So he made 3 separate trips while he was the Archbishop of Canterbury to check with the Pope. So I think it was William, might have been Henry. I forget who the king was. I read all that stuff, but you know, it's really fascinating. I mean, the whole life is kind of neat. And the conflict between the bishops that the Pope puts in charge of the church and what the kings of England always want to do, there's a constant battle. One of the other bishops that got in trouble is famous was Thomas Becket. And Thomas Becket, in fact, they made a great movie out of it with Richard Burton and I forget who the other actor was that played the king. But they killed Thomas Becket, Murder in the Cathedral. That was a play even. King Henry II was the one that had him murdered, basically, if you follow it up. But it was again because Becket wanted to prevent him from doing things that he wanted to do. And the conflict, of course, between the king and the archbishop was, as again, you could see there. And another one was Thomas More. I don't know if you noticed, but both Becket and More were first very important as the Lord Chancellor for the king before they were basically both Becket and More were encouraged by the king to become the archbishop because the king thought at the time that he would have control then over his bishop because they were good chancellors for him. But then once they take holy orders and they become the bishop, their authority now is connected to the Pope, and they feel for the church as a whole as opposed to an allegiance to the king. So they end up actually doing a good job, and that causes problems for the king who wants to push them around, right? So well, that's kind of an interesting thing. But let's get back to Anselm and talk about his we could go, I suppose. Well, I'll just go slow, John. Make sure we go to the actual text. I haven't been on this page before. Preface. Notice this line. You probably have heard this. How long? So it's not surprised that Martin Luther King Jr. used that line.
What does logium mean?
Ah.
Sounds like logos.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Pro means before. There was a separate text that's longer that does the same work, but it's called the monologion, and this is the proslogion. So I'm not sure exactly what it stands for. It reminds me of Kant, who wrote his critique on pure reason, and no one could follow it, and so he wrote now I can't think of that one, but it's similar title, but it basically means read this one first. Not prologion though. But here we go. This is